Hello, and welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. In our fellowship of Christ, our leadership of the local church, and our parenting of the children entrusted to us, we all seek forward momentum. This podcast is designed to provide that momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to season 2. Jeff, it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
You were on sabbatical for what, like 5 months?
No, but now that you bring it up, it's not a terrible idea.
How was your sabbatical?
You know, it was fantastic. So, I have two roles. I'm the president of Momentum Ministry Partners, but I'm also a senior pastor of Grace Church of Greater Akron. And it's probably the better part of 10 years ago, I forget now, but our elders mandate sabbaticals to all of our full-time staff here at the church. So the pastors, to the custodians, to the IT people, if you're full-time at Grace Church, it's in reality, it's every 6 to 7 years by the time you schedule it. Yeah. We have to go on sabbatical, and it is a blessing, and it is something that's needed more than you would think. When I'm sure if you've never been on sabbatical, you're probably thinking, "Man, I wish that happened to me." But in reality, you dread it a little bit because it is so disruptive. Yep. To your flow of life and all those kind of things. And then if you're a person with my personality, I have to do stuff. Like sitting around for more than an hour or two drives me insane. So to not be able to create or build. So I actually was dreading it because I've done one before. Yeah. And I had a blast. The first one I went on, I had a blast the first week, and then next year I was semi-miserable. This one, though, I went and I needed it way, way more than I thought. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time in my head and a lot of time in my heart, and I think the heartbeat of our elders is they want us to separate our vocation from our walk with Jesus. And you just have to, if you're in ministry, you have to have space to do that. So so God really used it. It was cool. Deep. It was cleansing. It was painful at times because you're dealing with stuff. But I came back with, somebody asked me, "Are you full of energy?" I'm like, "No, not really. I'm not more than I would normally have. I'm full of confidence, and I'm full of determination, and you have to come back to reality." So it was really good. So our elders make us do that. My Momentum board also honored that simultaneously. So
it's very gracious.
I was gone for a while. It was very gracious of them, but it was. It was great, so I'm grateful for it.
It's good to have you back.
Is it, Eric? Are you sure?
It is.
Are you just saying that because we're sitting here?
No, because I didn't like making all the hard decisions while you were gone.
I know. Who do you blame?
Exactly.
I know. Welcome to my...
And I couldn't use my favorite phrase. Well, Jeff said...
Yeah, that's right.
You need to...
Yeah. The top of the food chain isn't all it's cracked up to be. There's nobody to blame.
Exactly. Well, I am glad to have you back. It's good to be back doing season 2 of the podcast.
I know. It's amazing.
We took a little sabbatical from doing podcast episodes, so now we're back. We'll roll with season 2. We've got some fun things up our sleeves. In fact, just a little teaser, sabbatical and Sabbath rest will more than likely be one of our episodes. We'll dive a little bit deeper into that.
Be a good one.
If you're listening to Jeff share and you're like, I need a sabbatical, we'll give you some tips and tricks and how to convince your elder board to let you have one. How's that?
Well, they're probably none of that's true, but I highly recommend it. Yeah, we'll walk you through it. But tips and tricks, I don't know. I feel like people should subscribe for $99.95 right now to a seminar.
I'm trying to increase our marketing.
Oh, is that?
Oh, man. I love it. Well, in today's episode, we are wanting to talk about how do you choose a church? How do you even, maybe if you're a pastor listening to this conversation, how do you know that you are a church that people would want to go to? For our students listening, how do you choose a church that is a good fit for you, where you can engage, where you can connect, where you can even use the gifts that God's given you to be a part of the local body of Christ? And so we want to just kind of dive into that topic a little bit today to kick off season 2. So Jeff, as you just mentioned, I was going to introduce you as the lead pastor of Grace Church of Greater Akron, but you already did that. So let's talk through, what does that look like for you in your context as a church? How do you even help your staff think that through, of how do we walk that, even the fine line of like being attractional and yet have a purpose and a vision for your church?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I knew we were going to talk about this, I was thinking it through on different levels. Like I think the person who comes to church and is a lay person, I think their perspective on the church is radically different than the person who is a elder / leader and as a lay person, and then a staff person on a church. Yeah. So it's a broad question, like choosing those things. So I think as a pastor, when we're trying to help people know whether they're home at Grace Church or not, I think the things we're trying to help them get their head around are the things that I hope they make a decision on. Yep. So if I was talking to a student, or for lack of a better word, a lay person, and like I feel like I have to find a different church, I moved or I'm changing, or whatever. I'll start with like I'm changing churches. The beginning of finding a new church is rooted in why you're leaving your old one. And I think it's very, very important that we leave churches in a healthy way, in a clear way, and in a definitive way. Yep. There are real reasons why we should leave a church, and storming out the door or drifting away are not good options regardless of the reason. Yep. So I have people leave our church. We have we have 8 campuses as a church, but I pastor one of the 8 as well as oversee the rest of them. So my life looks very much like being a local pastor. Like I do counseling, and I do weddings, and I do funerals, and talk to people and all those kind of stuff, as well as lead a broad movement. Yeah. And that's actually on purpose. I purposely don't separate myself from the people. I think you lose your edge when you do that. So I know that as a pastor, now I'm talking to those of you who aren't right now, as a pastor, when someone comes to me and they say, Pastor Jeff, I am going to leave Grace Church. I had this happen recently. Guy came in, he's a friend of mine. He came in and he said, hey, he scheduled a meeting with me. He said, I want you to know that we're going to leave the church. I want you to know that we're going to go to this church. I want you to know that we're doing that because we have old relationships at this church. And the reason that we don't have good relationships at Grace Church is our fault, not yours. And we didn't get involved. You tried, etc.
Good for him.
Good for him. Like it was clarifying. Yeah. It took my insecurities away. Yeah. And it actually left us with a great relationship, right? I've had other people, especially the last couple of years, leave our church, and they're like, you know why I'm leaving your church? Because you are the cause of all my problems. And at least I know that their thinking is unhealthy, and when I see their name or I bump into them, I know that they're inside or outside of my church. Yeah. I've had a bunch of people these last couple of years with I think Neuhofer calls it the great sort, that lots of people are in and out of churches. And I'm like, I actually don't know if you left or not.
Right.
Like I don't know where you stand. I bump into you. I'm actually insecure about how to interact with you.
Yeah, it's hard.
And I would say to the layperson, like, that is not acceptable within the body of Christ. Even if you have to tell me, at least be definitive for me so that I know how to do it. Now, the reason why that's important is because if you go and then look for another church, you bring your baggage with you.
Right.
And so it's very hard to join into another group of believers if you have left a previous group of believers in an unhealthy way.
Yep.
And in the greater body of Christ, there's really no room for that. And so I just encourage you.
Yeah.
Now, that in place, there's times that we need to find new churches or we need to look for something. And what I would say is this: as a pastor, what I want you to know is that if you come to Grace Church and you feel like this is your home, I want you to know that that's not a convenience thing or a preference thing. It is a God thing. And God is the one who builds the local body. He's the one who says that each and every part is necessary.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do as a pastor, and I encourage all pastors and youth pastors to do this, I'm going to have some kind of a place where you're able to decide if you're in or you're out. And you may be at Grace for 5 years before you make that decision. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to rush you through it, and I'm not trying to withhold things from you through it, but I need to know how to interact with you, and you need to know how to interact with me. So we have onboarding processes, and they're changing all the time. They used to be 4 5-hour seminars. This is way back, some of you old guys and girls. This is way back in the 101, 201, 301, 401, Rick Warren model days. Now ours is a hour-and-a-half gathering with Jeff where we serve Chipotle, and then we go into small groups. And we're actually thinking about changing it again. It should always change because culture changes, all those kind of things. But what it is, it's a mark for you to say, I decided to be in. What I try to do in those times is I try to tell you everything that I can tell you about the mission and the vision of Grace Church. So when you're looking for a church, you need to look at theology. Like, do they view the Bible in a healthy way? The very next thing you need to look for is, like, why does this group of people exist? And what are they trying to accomplish? And how do they want to affect the world around them? And if they can't answer that, or they say one thing but it's playing out another way, I would encourage you to keep looking. God wants to weave you into something. He wants to do that because he actually has gifted you and called you as a layperson to invest your life. And you don't need to go in and set that tone for a church. That's the eldership's job. You certainly don't want to go in and try to change it. One of the things I say to our when I take people through an onboarding process, at the end of it, these are the actual words I say. I say, I want you to be a part of I want you to work for the unity of Grace Church. What do I mean by that? I mean, I just spent 2 hours talking to you about our mission and our vision and what we feel called to do it. If that's not for you, then let me help you find another church.
Right.
And I say, if you come in and try to change that, you and I will crack heads, and I'm not leaving.
Right.
So I'm like, that's why we're having the conversation. And you would be surprised the number of people that I've helped to find a different church coming out of that.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. We want to just hit pause for a second. The episode's not over. Don't click away. We're just hitting pause for a second to tell you guys about one of the amazing ministries God has entrusted us with. Urban Centers have been training followers of Jesus in effective hands-on evangelism for over 20 years with locations in both Philadelphia and Los Angeles. We offer unique life-on-life training sessions on how to start conversations, how to tell your story, and how to share your faith in simple and life-giving ways. We also provide practical, easy-to-use evangelism tools that make engaging with others simple. Our field experiences make our time together both practical and profitable by immediately putting the lessons learned through the training sessions into practice. To learn more about our urban centers and the life change that is happening there, visit www.buildmomentum.org. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the episode.
So I would say as a layperson, like you need to like look at that and like agree with it and be excited about it and be like, oh, this matches what God has called me to do.
Right.
And that's how you wind up in a faith, a fulfilling body. Most people are looking for friends, or they like the preaching, or they like the music.
Right.
Or they don't like either one of those things, but their kid gets along in the youth group a little bit, so they'll tolerate the rest of it. And I'm just like, the body of Christ is a way bigger decision than our preferences and our conveniences. And so I would just do that work a little bit. I'll have people say to me as a pastor, can I have coffee with you? I want to understand the church. And I always give a yes to that.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And then my job is they're interviewing me, I'm interviewing them a little bit. Like my job is to see what God's doing in their life too.
As a pastor, it's always interesting when you sit down with the new family who like just showed up at your church, and you find out like they're coming from another church across town. You ask them like, why are you here? Why did you leave? I love that, helping them leave well, making sure that there's not unresolved issues there. And we often, in my former church, we would make sure that we would help them leave their former church well, because we had seen it enough times to know that the same issue that they had there, they're just going to bring it with them.
Every single time.
It'll be the same issue here. So helping them work through that as part of our beginning conversations and making sure that there was not anything there is a big deal.
If somebody comes to your church or your youth group complaining about their last church and their last youth group, they will be with you for 3 years.
Tops.
The first year and a half, you will be the greatest thing that ever happened. The second year and a half, you will be the worst thing that ever happened. They'll leave and go to another church and start that process over.
Yep.
When people, they're like, yeah, I've been in all kinds of churches. That's a red flag for me.
Yeah.
When people sit down and you ask why you left your church, if it's not like we moved,
Right.
or there's pain, like if they're not sorrowful and even a little bit hurt,
Yep.
then my red flag goes up. I'm like, oh, but when I hear the story, I'm like, oh, that's so painful.
Right.
Or this, this broke. I'm like, okay. But they will speak that in like grief.
Yep.
They won't speak that with like, well, the pastor was just an idiot,
Right.
kind of thing. Because they're just going to think about that. When I tell our staff all the time, when I hit a red flag with somebody and they come in and they start telling me what's wrong with the church in North America, I always tell my staff, you can solve that problem in 2 years, or you can solve it in 20 minutes. I'm going to go right after it. I'm going to make sure that they know that they're going to hate Grace Church, and I'm borderline going to run them off a little bit, because what's going to happen is that's just going to turn into 10 years of or 10 meetings of grumpy conversations for the next 2 years. That's on them.
Yeah.
Right?
If you're a pastor, if you're a staff member, even, I think even that knowing your mission and your vision, your uniqueness, what separates you from the other churches in your local community, that's so huge, because it also helps you in that process when you meet new people, to be able to tell them what is unique about you and even why maybe it's not going to be a good fit. I still to this day think of the story. I was preaching back at our church in Maryland, and it was an election year, and this lady had come to our church for the very first time, and she cornered me in the cafe after I'd finished preaching, and she said, "Pastor, I'm disappointed in you." I said, "Oh, really? Why is that?" "You didn't tell me who to vote for today for the election that's coming up next week." And I said, I grinned from ear to ear. I said, "I'm so glad that you found out in your first week here that this is not the church for you, because we're just not going to do that. We're going to help you learn biblical principles." And, and I kind of gave her who we are as a church. I said, "If that's the key thing that you're looking for, this isn't going to be a good fit for you." And, it ended in a good spot, but, she was so taken back by me making that comment, but it was true. That's who we are as a church.
And I think what happens sometimes, I think pastors and youth pastors, and I think we mystify people coming to church, and we're so hungry to reach people. We're so hungry to grow that we're unfocused on who we're reaching and what we're growing. I have, in an ideal situation, you're helping that lady find the right body of Christ, and because we, like, Grace Church is not in any way, shape, or form the only right or healthy or thriving church. And I have lots of churches in our area that I trust, and they are very, very different.
Yep.
And I'm like, actually, what I need to do is I need to hand you over here.
Yep.
In an ideal situation, that's it. In a non-ideal situation, I have to protect my flock.
Yeah.
And a person who doesn't align with us, we usually think about that in terms of like theology. But I'm saying methodology. Methodology is usually way more divisive than theology, so to speak. I think people understand what I'm saying right there. And I'm like, I have to, because that person will wound. They will blow up a life group. They will cause misery to lay leaders.
Yeah.
And for a pastor and a youth leader, you got to have some spine.
Yep.
Because here's the bottom line: we don't like conflict. That's why we won't do things, and we won't take the 20-minute option.
Yep.
So in our desire to be like, well, you know what Jeff said, or, we were joking earlier, like to pass things off, we won't take the hit.
Right.
Now here's the reality, everybody, and I mean this in a loving way. It's going to sound harsh, but I don't mean it harsh. The reality is, when you have that 20-minute conflict, you protect your flock, and in reality, within 2 weeks, you won't remember that person anymore. You're just too afraid of a moment. And I do not mean be a jerk, and I do not mean throw people off the bus and back the bus over them. I do not mean that at all.
Yeah.
I mean it in a shepherding way. You want to shepherd that person. You want to protect your flock, and you're the one that has to stuff up into that. And you can have the same corrosive thing in a youth group.
Yep.
And you want to love kids and you want to help them, but you have to protect who God has already given you. You can have that with parents who come in and start making demands and poison. And there's times that we, as shepherds, we have to gather that part of our job too. So,
Jeff, as I was preparing for this episode and this conversation, and thinking back on my years of being a youth pastor and leading in our church, there were two things that quickly came to my mind that caused confusion or even division. And the first one is kind of what you were just talking about, like the personal preferences, the opinions of people. But when they became, when a personal preference or an opinion became like law for everyone else, when it became like, this is my preference and you all should agree with me, oh man, that would often just cause, you can hold a personal preference but keep it to yourself and not, I know people who go to church and they're like, I don't really enjoy the music. I don't like drums. It's not my thing. I'd prefer hymns, but I can still engage and I can still get on board with the whole of the church and the direction. But man, when your personal opinion and your preference, when you start to put that on other people, that is a dangerous thing.
And you're going to run into that. And this is where I'm saying, like, your mission and your vision as a church, as a youth ministry, needs to be clearly defined. And then as a person looking for a church, it's the vision and the mission. Our vision and mission, like as Grace Church, as a local church, our vision and mission is not cutting edge music.
Right.
Our vision and mission is to make Jesus make sense to a 24-year-old.
Yeah.
That defines our music.
Right.
So what you would find is I'm actually no more attached to the music than somebody else is, because I'm not 24. My preference for music is not usually the most current music. I like all kinds of music, but it's if you looked at the playlist on my phone, it's not top 40.
Right.
So when I'm alone in my truck, I listen to what I want to listen to. But when I'm at church, I want the music to register with the people we're trying to reach.
Yeah.
You can join that mission
Right.
and deal with that preference.
Yep.
First of all, you might wind up liking it more than you think, which is what I often find. Or like there's all kinds of people that wear earplugs
Yeah.
here. Like in our music, actually, I don't think is that loud, but they do that. So you can do that. If you look and say the preaching, the music is the mission, I would really challenge you to say those, like you just said, those are your preferences.
Yep.
Who is the church reaching?
Yep.
How effectively are they doing that?
Yeah.
Is there cobwebs in the baptistry? Is there life there? Is the community being loved and reached there?
Yep.
It doesn't matter the size, the complexity, or the style of the church if those things are happening.
Yeah.
And within that, like I had a family one time say, they said, we're really, really committed to homeschooling. When are you going to push that as a church? I said, never. They said, oh, they thought we would because when our kids were in elementary school, Heidi and I homeschooled them. Heidi homeschooled them. I didn't do anything, to be honest with you. But she homeschooled them because I work on the weekends.
Right.
So they were like, oh, we thought that was a major priority for you as a church. I was like, oh, no, that was a pragmatic decision for Heidi and I.
Right.
But I looked at them and I said, but I know a church that's a priority for.
Yep.
Walked them over there, connected them. They were there for, I think, 17 years.
Yep.
And then a plethora of reasons they made a change.
Yep.
And they actually came back to Grace because all their kids are grown, kind of thing. But I'm like, I think as the person coming in, you have to sort that out.
Yep.
And I'm not saying
Yep.
that a church who homeschools or maybe is more active in the cultural wars is right or wrong. I don't want to judge their hearts. But like you said, it's not us.
Correct.
And the sooner I can tell you that, actually, the more loving I am towards you.
Yeah, you're being clear, which is kind. You're being forthcoming and putting kind of the cards on the table, like you were saying earlier. We can do that in 20 minutes, or we can have a very long, drawn-out process. Yeah. Jeff, I think the other thing, as I looked back, that oftentimes could be confusing is our terminology, and tell me if you see this to be true, but the terms that we use in our church world, we sometimes are speaking a different language.
100%.
When, if you're coming in and somebody says, well, this is what I'm looking for in church, and they mean the building, and if they mean like the service, and we use the term church in terms of the people and in terms of the engagement, we're already starting on a different page.
Yep.
There's all kinds of discipleship, evangelism, like being a leader, like that may mean very different things. We had people that would come into our church and they're like, yeah, I was a small group leader in our church before. And what they really meant was they would host, they would open their home. So I'm thinking like, oh, that's great. We could make them a small group leader down the road, when really they have no gifts or skill set. They've actually never facilitated a conversation and engaged people in helping them apply the truths of Scripture to their daily life. They actually just put out snacks in their home.
When I say discipleship, I mean, actually just a book study, that kind of thing. This is where I would say pastors, leaders, lay leaders, you have to sit down with people and know them. And even these onboarding processes that I talked about, the reason we took them from seminars to small groups is because we realized we were informing people, not knowing people. And so it's in those environments. If you're a bigger church, you need probably a group strategy. If you're a smaller church, you just need a lunch strategy.
Yep.
And it's sitting down with an individual, getting inside their heart and the mind, having, when we were a smaller church, we'd have people over for dinner a lot. That's where we got to know them. If you're in youth ministry, this is buying coffee, buying the soda, kind of thing. But you have to, if you believe that God builds His church, then when I'm not talking about an attender or a guest, I'm talking about when someone raises their hand and says, "I think this is my church now."
Yeah.
You need to figure out a way to know they made that decision, and then you need them deciding that you are their church does not mean that you decided that that's true.
Right.
So now you decide.
Yeah.
And you need to do that in relationship. And when I asked Heidi to marry me, we were married till she said yes. And that's what I mean by like churches are too eager sometimes. Like, we want to be here. Oh, so exciting. Somebody wants to be here. I'm like, no, you can wind up with a real mess.
Yeah.
And same thing in a youth group, let you go through that. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think helping your team, your leaders, your staff to find those terms. When we say community, when we say outreach, when we say evangelism, this is when we say discipleship. This is what we mean by those things.
When we say the lost, when we say the culture, when we say the world, what do we mean? And,
be crystal clear.
And what's our heart about that? You know, there's a lot of people nowadays, tragically, I think, resent lost people, and they think that a lost person is the same as a person who is openly rebellious against God. And so those are your discipleship opportunities with those folks.
Yeah. Well, Momentum is passionate about that. If you have not listened to the Jeff, even you use this term, making Jesus make sense.
Yeah.
We have a whole episode in season 1 on that topic, where evangelism, is strikes a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. And so that phrase, making Jesus make sense, is something that Momentum Ministry Partners is passionate about, something that you and I are passionate about. And so what are the contexts in which you do that? We're also passionate. We do this with our travel teams. We actually take students to a church. We'll send them into a church that maybe they've never been to, and we ask them, or we're trying to train and equip them to look for those different things. To be a visitor at a church is I think a healthy process, where you get to look at the leadership and the staff, and but also their doctrine, their verbiage. Like, is their signage clear? Do you know where the bathrooms are? Do you know where to drop off your kids? Like, do you know where the community room is? Because that's where all the meetings happen after service. Like, and so looking for those things from the lens of a visitor. So even if you're a pastor and, have you gone to your church with the lens of a visitor? Do all those things make sense? Are they clear? Does it all fit?
I think when you're in ministry vocationally, I think being a guest a few times a year is really important to feel what that feels like. I think that will give you more insight. You'll learn more by being a guest than going and studying what another church does with guests.
Yeah.
And so you'll look at that. When if you have kids, you'll learn more by going and checking your kids into other people's children's ministries.
Yep.
I remember we did that one time, and afterwards, my kids were probably like 10-ish kind of an age, and we got in the car, and my one son said, "Dad, will you please never make us go to that church again?" And I called the pastor. He was a friend of mine. I was like, "Hey, I think you should know, man."
Yeah.
Like this. So that kind of thing. I would also say this: those of you who are in ministry, and I would say everything that we just said to a lay person, you should apply to yourself when evaluating your ministry. So, like, should I stay or should I go? I'm like, well, what's the mission? What's the vision? What's your alignment?
Right.
And then should I take a job or not take a job? Well, what's their vision? What's their mission? What's their alignment?
Right.
Like, you need to ask those same kind of questions, because that's where a church staff pops.
Yep.
Is when we're lined up philosophically and lined up missionally so that we can actually serve together instinctually.
Yep.
And when you see that miss, especially if you are a senior leadership and your elder board or church board won't let you go where your heart is drawn, or if you're in youth ministry or children's ministry and your senior pastor won't let you do that, that's when you probably need to start looking, and you need to screen that out before you ever said yes to the job in the first place.
Yep. Yeah, that's very good. I think, Jeff, as we wrap up, let's go a little deeper. I know we have a lot of pastors who listen to our podcast. Help them. We were having a conversation yesterday in a different context about the idea of, as a pastor, working with people and working for people. Can you just talk for a couple minutes, explain that thinking, and how can that even relate in this context of choosing a church or being a church that would want to engage in your community?
Yeah, so when you think about church culture, there's some church culture that would say the pastor works for people. They're an employee of the church. Therefore, your job is to have a program. You respond to the wants, needs, and desires of the funders of said program. So that the parents say, we want our youth group to be this way. The people say, these are the songs that these are the types of things you should be doing and worship leading, that kind of thing. And even there are churches that are board run. Like the board said, you have to keep these office hours.
Right.
You have to. That's a culture where the pastor works for people. In my view, it's not healthy. In my view, you're looking for an environment where the expectation is you work with people. So in youth ministry, instead of being told this is the program you run and these are the you're looking and saying, these are the students that God has brought into me. How do I help them discover their spiritual gifts and then act on it? As a senior pastor, you're looking and saying, this is the community, the outside the church. These are the needs of the community. These are the spiritual gifts that God has brought into the church to reach that community. And I'm looking, and instead of doing it, I'm raising up people to do it. So one of my things I say a lot is if you invest in leadership development for 5 years, it pays off for 25 years. And that is bringing co-laborers up with you that are probably unpaid. Right? And they're not ministry, quote unquote, professionals, but they're gifted, and I would argue even appointed by Christ within that body. And so it's a mindset. And I think understanding that mindset, understanding that set of expectations, I see a lot of church hurt on the staff side, a lot of pastor hurt and a lot of pastor frustration because they didn't or weren't able to think through that simple little grid. What is being asked of me?
Yeah, and a lot of the conversations that I have right now with pastors, and even in this context of our topic of like, how do we help our people in our community choose us as a church that would be a good fit for them? There's this like mindset of like, I want to like engage with our community. I want to draw people in. I want to reach the lost. I want to be able to do all those things. That I love their heart as a pastor. But then when you look at the practicality of how they spend their time, they're working for people. And it's this mindset of like, I've got to do, I've got to keep my office hours. I got to spend, 15 hours writing the sermon, and, I'm holed up in my office with all my theology books, and, and then it's staff meeting and meeting and meeting and meeting and when you zoom out and look at the time, how much time in your week are you spending with your target audience? How much time are you spending actually in your community, getting to know the needs of the community, spending time with the people that live, eat, sleep, work in your local context? Like, if you're not actively doing that in some way, shape, or form, I think we're missing key opportunities.
What you're going to do if you don't do that is you're going to start facilitating the Christian subculture instead of affecting this culture around you. I actually felt like at one of our campuses here in Akron, that was getting a little out of whack, and it makes sense because of COVID. Like we had to meet so much, and here in Ohio, our governor would speak every Tuesday, and he would change the rules. So it just took logistically. Don't take that as pro or con. It just was, you know, and so like logistically, it was just nuts. So I realized that we were falling into some habits, and so I actually put in a principle, and I said I want a 40-60 principle. I want 40% of your time, including your weekend responsibilities, or if you're in youth ministry, it'd be like your Wednesday night or whenever you have youth meeting responsibilities. So 40% of time, including your meeting responsibilities, can be spent in the office. 60% of your time needs to be spent outside the office. And it's a paradigm.
Right.
People have different jobs, and there's different seasons, and nobody's going to get written up for something. But I'm like, I just want us to have this mindset that our place is with the people.
Right.
That's where we're going to develop volunteers to do ministry with. That's where we're going to build community partnerships to do ministry with. And if we don't do that, we start running a church for the people in the church. And God didn't give to the church. God didn't give the church alone. He gave the church to the world. And if a church is not affecting the world, we're not a church. We're a religious meeting, maybe a book study, probably a group of religious narcissists. And we're not seeking and saving. I said in a sermon recently, I was talking about Luke chapter 15, and the scripture says Jesus was often surrounded by notorious sinners. I love that word. And he would eat with them and was associated with them. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were mad about it. And I said in a sermon recently, I said, I want you guys to see this. I said, I want you to see where Jesus was. Jesus was in the harvest field. And I want you to see who was mad about that. It wasn't the harvest that was offended. It was the religious folk. And that's the difference between doing for and doing with in the context that we're talking about it right now. And you want to know that. Like as a lay person, you want to know that how does the church I'm looking at think about all that? And then as a staff person, you want to know how do the authorities over me, like I have an elder board. I have authority over me. I need to know what they want from me. And I know that they want me out in that harvest. And so that's the stuff you're weighing as you go forward. Methods, music, all that stuff, the only way that change is embraced is if there's a greater motive that is visionary and missional. Other than that, it's arguing about who wants what.
Right. Yeah, those preferences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, this is an awesome conversation. I'm sure we could continue on for several more hours on this topic.
I'd have to go on sabbatical again.
There you go. Well, stay tuned for future episodes where we'll talk about sabbatical and Sabbath rest and all that good stuff. But as always, if you have questions that you'd love for us to answer or be a resource to you in any way, we're here to do that. We love getting to partner with a local church. So thanks for tuning in to today's episode.
Well, friends, that's going to do it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'd be honored if you went ahead and subscribed to the podcast, and that way you can just stay up to date with the new and exciting episodes we have coming for you. We'd also be honored if you just took a second to rate and review the podcast. That helps others to know about this resource as well. If you have any questions or a topic you'd like us to address, please feel free to email those to us at info@buildmomentum.org. That's info@buildmomentum.org. To learn more about Momentum Ministry Partners and our many resources, follow us on social media at Momentum Ministry Partners and on our website, buildmomentum.org. And if you're interested in supporting Momentum, feel free to visit us at buildmomentum.org/give.